You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, I'm back with Ryan Atkinson, talking about another one of his blogs. This time it's human factors on expedition. Certainly a big believer in human factors, so it's fantastic just to showcase this recent blog that Ryan has written and posted. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Owen, it's great to be back. Thank you again for inviting me on.
So just let's just unpack this one actually, because it's a fantastic read and you're just about to hear it in audio format. But Ryan, could I just get you to speak to why you wrote the blog in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, so actually, the blog came out of my teaching that I do for World Extreme Medicine, because I wanted to create sort of a succinct resource that I could signpost participants on the courses we do to following my human factors lectures, where they could, have a bit of a follow up and read at their own pace and kind of prompt some further thoughts and research for them. But really, it's just human factors and CRM, crew resource management. It's such an area that I'm so passionate about because it blends both my experience from expeditions in a non-medical capacity and now my work as a paramedic, both on expeditions and within the ambulance service, and mountain rescue background. It draws all that together, and I think what I came to realize is that this stuff is so relevant regardless of your role, regardless of the environment that you're working in. And it's a bit of a cliche, but it's like teamwork really does make or break success in pretty much all aspects of life, whether that's a really intense high stress environment or whether it's just something more mundane and straightforward. I don't think it's quoted directly in the blog, but I always finish up when I'm teaching on human factors and stuff with the line that, the medical stuff in many ways is the easy bit. And it's learning, and you can get your head around that with sufficient time and training, but it's the humans that you've got to watch out for, because with all the best will in the world, all the best training in the world, when you're put into these high stress environments, unless you have been um, maybe stress inoculated and practiced these skills and these, I think more importantly, these attitudes, then all of the knowledge, the underpinning knowledge, the technical skills, the work that you do around whatever your role is will just crumble without a solid foundation of human factors and strong crew resource management. And I'm quite interested in aviation. I find it fascinating to read about, and it's just been a really interesting journey for me reading about how aviation has studied and employed human factors and crew resource management learning, and yet we still see plane crashes all around the world on a yearly basis. And if you actually start to read into and dig into why they're happening, the vast majority of them are still caused not by technical failures, but by human error. And I just think it's so important that human factors crew resource management is at the forefront of our thinking about any kind of high performance in difficult situations. And it's really the bedrock that everything else is built on top of.
Yeah, indeed. And you write in the blog, and I firmly agree with this, Ryan, and I fundamentally agree with everything you said. But you say it's not really just about competence and experience. It really is about the psychological, social, and organizational influences on performance. And to your point around, you may not actually experience any acute manifestation or pathology on expedition, but you will 100% experience human factors, and you'll experience the group dynamic for better or worse. But also, and you write this in the blog, is around, really safeguarding against the cognitive biases of groupthink and social proof, which amplify risk in extreme environments. Could I get you to sort of talk to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So groupthink and social proof, I think they're two closely related but quite different concepts in human factors. And in my experience of starting out, as an outdoor instructor and then going on expeditions, joining mountain rescue, and now being a paramedic, they are the two most common things that I personally have come across in in particularly within the expedition, within the outdoor environment, be that expedition medical care or just, a bunch of mates going skiing or whatever. And I use the Tunnel Creek avalanche as a case study in my blog, and the video is linked there that you'll be able to watch. But you do just find that when you're in the outdoor environment and you're with a group of passionate people who all want to achieve a goal, whether that be get down a ski run, summit a mountain, whatever it is, we all have a tendency, and I'm guilty myself, right? All of this learning comes from me having made all of these mistakes, and I still make these mistakes, even with the experience I have. But we have a tendency to want to form a cohesive group and not challenge that group and be accepted, socially accepted. We all want to be socially accepted in life, right? That's a normal human thing to want. The issue is that when that starts to affect your ability to critique decisions, critical decisions, threshold decision points, risky scenarios, because you're more interested in forming a cohesive group than you are challenging that cohesion by being the one outlier that says, hang on, should we stop and have a think about this? Um, and that is a really, really difficult thing to overcome. And that is the boundary between groupthink, where the cohesion of the group becomes more important, and social proof, where you don't want to be the outlier challenging that. But I think it's hard to overcome, but just having an awareness of it and keeping the conversations going around it. And I think perhaps starting your expeditions with a little chat during your team brief at the beginning of like, look, guys, we know these are the hazards. We've all fallen foul of this in the past. So let's try and be aware of it, and let's make this a safe space where actually no one is going to be ostracized for holding their hands up and saying, guys, I disagree with this. And I think if you can build those structures into the way you perform in expeditions, on high performing teams, whatever your area of work is, then that can go a long way towards mitigating these risks before we've even encountered them. And ultimately, that's what human factors and good crew resource management is about, right? It's about, it's a reaction to your risk assessment and your dynamic risk assessment, and it's building in structures that are going to mitigate these risks before we reach those points. And then hopefully you never have to open your medical kit, and you never have to deal with the trauma or the emotional trauma or any of that, because you've created a safe space where people feel able to challenge, to speak up, to be the outlier, and there's no fear or stigma attached to that.
Yeah, listen, I agree with that. And you used to denote this in the blog actually, Ryan, around, the jumping off point here on expedition, in pre-hospital care, in any high performing team is acknowledging human limitation, acknowledging, that we are all flawed individuals with our limits. We've got poor short-term cognitive ability for short-term memory retention, and that needs to be acknowledged. But to your wider point around giving people permission to speak into your practice and say, look, I may not have all the answers. Please, like you said, please do speak up. Please do challenge me if you think anything's wrong, or I'm missing anything, because and on what it does is, to your point, democratizes the vigilance across the team and allows people to speak into your practice. And the blog really, it speaks that nicely. And just before we hear it, actually, you also, and I'd just like you to speak to this, if that's okay, around, the closed loop communication, the checklist, the shared situation awareness, but absolutely, that flattened hierarchy, because actually it's through these tools that we can start to mitigate error, and we can start again, to what you said, utilize the team to really provide safe practice, and indeed a safe expedition, or a safe pre-hospital passage for the patient.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good point, right? And there's a tension here in that when we speak of flattened hierarchies, that's really important. It can add a lot of value using, techniques like pace and things like this, where everyone's able to probe, alert, challenge, and react to situations that are unfolding that may present unmanageable or unnecessary risk. And flattening the hierarchy is great in terms of dealing with that, in reducing the authority gradient, but it's really important to recognize that you still need leadership structure, right? Flattening the hierarchy is not about disbanding leadership. because ultimately someone still has to call the shots. You are going to be in situations, whether it's in pre-hospital care, whether it's in a HEMS team, in a resus bay, or out on an expedition, where you are faced with these threshold decisions, these critical decision points, where actually democracy isn't okay in some of these situations, or it's going to delay things. And ultimately, someone needs to have the authority from the rest of the group to hold their hand up and say, okay, I hear you guys, but this is what we're going to do now. And as long as that's safe, that's cool. And I can get on board with that. And that's about good followership. And there is a time and a place to challenge or critique or reflect on those decisions, but it's not in the moment. So I think it's about finding that balance between reducing the authority gradient as much as you can while still allowing, as a team, giving that authority to your leader, whoever that is, your consultant, your senior paramedic, your expedition leader, and establishing the ground rules that actually, yeah, it's okay that when push comes to shove, what you say goes, and us as effective, valuable followers will listen to that as long as it's safe.
Yeah, listen, absolutely agree with that. And you're just about to hear the blog now. It's a fantastic blog with some fantastic examples as well, just to illustrate your points, Ryan. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, and it's always a pleasure just to unpick your brain on some of these topics. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, mate. It's been a pleasure to share with you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so picture this. You're standing on like a razor-thin mountain ridge. The air's thin, wind's picking up, and you're with your team. These are really experienced people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're having this tense debate. Do we push on, go for the summit? Or, turn back after all this effort?
Yeah, and it's exactly that moment, isn't it? That decision point. The environment's tough, obviously, but suddenly the biggest risks aren't really the weather or the gear anymore.
They become internal.
Exactly, internal. I mean, the data for decades now, it's shown that disasters in these kinds of high-stakes places, they rarely happen just because someone's incompetent or their kit fails.
Right.
It happens when you get that perfect storm, Fatigue, ambition, and maybe most importantly, flawed group dynamics all colliding.
And that collision, that's what we're really digging into today. Our mission here is to look past the technical stuff, the ropes, the GPS, all
the hardware,
and focus on the operational side, the psychological tools, the things that actually make the difference between, success and tragedy. We're talking about human factors and crew resource management, or CRM.
Exactly. Tools that were really honed in aviation, but they're just as crucial out in the wild.
They sound like essential skills.
They are. They're the so-called soft skills that become incredibly hard necessities under pressure. It's all about how we think, how we talk to each other, how we organize ourselves when things get really intense. Understanding this stuff, that's how a team of experts becomes a truly resilient unit.
Okay, let's maybe define our terms first. When we say human factors, it can sound a bit academic. What does it actually mean for that team on the ridge?
Yeah, fair point. Human factors is, it's basically a catch-all term. It covers all the psychological, social, and even organizational things that shape how we perform.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as acknowledging that, okay, humans can be the weakest link, but we're also the most adaptable part of the system. So it includes the obvious stuff like stress and fatigue, but also the trickier relational issues, how we interact.
Can you give an example?
Yeah.
Of a relational issue?
The big one is the authority gradient, that invisible hierarchy. It's that reluctance, maybe, to question someone senior, or maybe just a really charismatic leader.
Right.
So if the lead guide makes a call that feels a bit off, the junior person might feel, psychologically unsafe speaking up, even if their gut feeling is screaming, wait, this isn't right.
And what we see in accident reports, I guess, is that these little human factors, they might seem small in, say, an office.
Yeah, manageable.
Out there.
Yeah.
On a glacier or deep in a jungle. They just get amplified massively. Suddenly everyone's affected. My blind spot becomes the whole team's problem.
Precisely. And the research backs this up. Even the most experienced pros, when they're tired or maybe just really invested in succeeding, they start taking mental shortcuts, heuristics.
Okay.
And if we don't build systems that expect and mitigate that basic human tendency to err, then individual mistakes can become system-wide risks.
Which brings us to a really interesting point, because technical skill alone doesn't seem to prevent this. We looked at that tragic 2012 Tunnel Creek avalanche case.
Oh, yeah, a classic, sadly.
This was a group of elite, highly trained backcountry pros. They knew the area, had all the gear, knew the safety drills.
Top of their game, technically.
And yet this cascade of human factors just led them straight into disaster.
Exactly. They didn't fail because they forgot how to use their transceivers or dig a snow pit. They failed because they fell into these specific heuristic traps, those mental shortcuts we were just talking about.
Right.
The analysis pointed to two really specific ones that often get kind of mixed up.
Okay, let's try and unpack those, because you're right. They sound similar, but operate differently, don't they?
They do. First, you've got groupthink. Now, this is really a structural group-level problem. It's when the desire for harmony, for everyone to just agree and get along,
Overrides everything else.
yeah, it overrides a realistic look at other options. Safer options, maybe. The thinking is kind of like, well, if everyone else seems okay with this, it must be fine. Let's not rock the boat.
Okay, so groupthink is like a failure in the team's decision-making process itself. Its ability to handle dissent. What about the second trap, then? Social proof. Is that more about individual pressure?
That's a good way to think about it. Social proof is more of an individual psychological drive. It makes people conform because they look around, see what others are doing, and basically assume, okay, they must know what they're doing.
Wow.
So they go along with it, partly because they don't want to be the odd one out, or maybe they don't want to be seen as the one slowing things down or being difficult.
So applying that to Tunnel Creek,
Yeah.
groupthink might have been the collective sort of downplaying the avalanche risk because they all really wanted to ski that line.
Plausible, yeah. The desire for the goal overshadowed objective assessment.
And then social proof could have been an individual skier, maybe having some doubts, but seeing the expert skier ahead dropping in.
And thinking, well, if they're going, it must be okay. They're pros.
Exactly. They must know something I don't.
You've got it. One's a failure to encourage or listen to different views. The other's the individual urge to just fit in. But either way,
The danger gets ignored.
the truth about the hazard gets ignored.
Which is why this whole concept of crew resource management,
Yeah.
CRM, is so important. It came from aviation, right? They faced these exact same problems decades ago.
They did. Aviation had its own series of painful lessons. They realized pretty early on that just having technically brilliant pilots wasn't enough to stop accidents caused by human error. CRM was their answer.
And it acts as a kind of safety net. I like that analogy with the Swiss cheese model.
Ah, yeah, the James Reason model. It's perfect here. It basically says, look, mistakes, the holes in the cheese slices are inevitable. Humans aren't perfect.
Right. Can't eliminate the holes entirely.
Exactly. So CRM is about deliberately adding more layers of cheese, or maybe making sure the holes in the layers you have don't all line up at the same time.
Okay. So the goal isn't zero errors, which is impossible, but making sure those errors don't connect to cause a catastrophe. How does that translate from a 747 cockpit to, say, a climbing team on Denali? What are the practical bits?
Well, the components are actually surprisingly straightforward, but putting them into practice, that can be culturally quite radical for some teams. First up, checklists.
Checklists. I can imagine some elite climbers or guides thinking, checklists, we know what we're doing.
Oh, absolutely. There can be resistance because it feels basic. But they're lifesavers. They combat expert bias, the I've done this 1,000 times, complacency. And they directly fight the effects of stress and fatigue.
Oh, so?
Because when you're tired or stressed or cold, your brain will skip steps. It just happens. A checklist forces you externally to confirm critical actions. It's like an external backup for your working memory.
Yeah.
Stops that dangerous drift from standard procedures.
Okay, that makes sense. And you mentioned fatigue. That's a huge human factor itself. How does CRM address just being exhausted?
It makes managing fatigue an open operational priority, not something you just tough out. Tired people make bad decisions. Full stop. So CRM involves actively monitoring each other. Are people showing signs of exhaustion, stress, even minor injuries need flagging? And that links straight into the next piece, closed-loop communication.
Which is more than just chatting, I assume. It sounds structured.
It absolutely is. No room for assumptions. Closed loop means if I give an instruction, say, host speaker, double check the anchor on the west side.
Okay.
You need to confirm back, checking anchor, west side, confirm, and then I acknowledge, confirmed. It sounds maybe a bit formal,
Yeah.
but in a noisy, high-stress environment, it guarantees the message was received and understood, prevents those dangerous misunderstandings where someone thought something was done, but it wasn't.
That seems vital for planning, too. If communication is that clear, it probably helps with the whole what-if process.
Definitely. That's the third bit. Planning and contingencies. A really professional team, honestly, spends more time planning for what could go wrong than just focusing on success.
Really? More time on failure.
Yep. Before any big move, they're wargaming. What if the weather turns instantly? What if we lose comms? What if someone gets injured? You decide the backup plan before the crisis hits, not when you're freezing and panicking at 20,000 feet.
All these pieces, checklists, clear comms, contingency plans, they all seem to point back towards leadership, don't they? And also followership. You mentioned flattening that authority gradient earlier.
That's absolutely central to making CRM actually work. Leaders need to be flexible. Sometimes, yes, you need to be directive, make quick calls. But other times, especially for big decisions, you need to be collaborative, draw out opinions.
Right.
But crucially, the culture has to empower followership. The newest person on the team, the least experienced, they need to feel not just permitted, but expected to speak up if they see something unsafe that maybe the leader missed.
So it's about creating that psychological safety we talked about.
Exactly. Everyone has a role in safety.
And if a team manages to pull all this off, the checklists, the comms, the planning, the flattened gradient, what's the end goal? What does that look like?
The ultimate goal is achieving shared situational awareness.
Okay, define that.
It's basically having a synchronized mental model across the whole team. Everyone understands what's happening right now, what does it mean for our goal, and what are we going to do about it together.
I see.
If everyone's operating from that same accurate picture of reality, the team can adapt quickly and safely when, the wind suddenly doubles on the ridge.
Now, think about the teams themselves.
Yeah.
The research you looked at contrasts two main types you find in these situations.
Yeah, broadly speaking, on one hand, you often see what are called flash teams.
Of teams, yeah.
These are often groups of really skilled individuals, could be climbers, scientists, whatever, who come together often for a specific, maybe quite ambitious personal or group goal.
High individual skill, then.
Very high, usually. But the team structure itself can be fragile. They might not have deep trust yet, or those embedded communication habits we've been talking about. They haven't necessarily built that collective resilience.
So maybe the drive for the individual achievement or just the summit itself is stronger than the drive to protect the team unit.
That can certainly happen, which is why the ideal, the aspiration, is to function as a pro team.
And what makes a team pro in this context?
A pro team fundamentally prioritizes collective success over individual ego. They see delegation not as offloading work, but as smart resource management. They communicate openly, they adapt, they learn.
And how do they measure success differently?
For a pro team, the ultimate success isn't just bagging the peak. It's, did everyone get down safely, together? The leader isn't the sole hero. They're more like the conductor, ensuring everyone plays their part. And followership is just as valued as leadership because it taps into the whole group's intelligence.
What really strikes me listening to all this is how simple a lot of these concepts are fundamentally. It's not about some cutting-edge gadget or super complex training program. The things that actually save lives seem to be conversations, checklists, shared awareness, and just having the courage and the team culture that allows you to speak up.
You've hit the nail on the head. Human factors and CRM, they're not just dry theory. They're the essential, practical framework that keeps a team functioning when everything else is trying to pull it apart.
Yeah.
And the core takeaway really is this: surviving and thriving in extreme environments. It isn't really about conquering nature. It's much more about understanding ourselves, our own limits, our own biases, our flaws, and critically, our ability to work together effectively as a team.
So for everyone listening, maybe think about how these ideas, flattened hierarchies, closed-loop communication might apply in your own world. Could be at work, in a critical project meeting, maybe even just planning a family trip.
Absolutely. And maybe ask yourself this: where might you be falling into groupthink? Or maybe being swayed by social proof? Are you going along with something just because everyone else is, or because it genuinely makes sense from a safety or procedural standpoint? What simple, maybe even slightly tedious checklist could you put in place right now? Something that adds that extra vital layer of cheese to your own safety model, whatever you're doing. That's really where the practical application of all this begins.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.